Welcome to today's online workshop on creating a simple and free asynchronous course using Edmodo. My name is Matt Livingston, and I'm a teacher at Tokai University and also a member of the Remote Teaching Committee, which is helping to oversee online learning at Tokai this year. I'll start with a brief overview of what will happen in today's workshop. First, we'll discuss who is this workshop actually for. I'll go through the process of getting started with Edmodo. We'll talk about how to register your students on this platform, how to share course materials, creating and grading quizzes and assignments. We'll also talk about ways to encourage interaction using this online platform. I'll share some feedback from my Spring 2020 students. Finish with a summary of the benefits and limitations and give you some pointers in the direction of additional resources. Given that this workshop is part of the Technology in Teaching workshops of JALT, I want to be clear who this workshop is actually for. We know that there's a large range of online platforms to choose from, so I want to be clear who this particular platform would be most appropriate for. Although it may not be the most comprehensive platform out there, Edmodo is actually one of the easiest. It's great for teachers with limited time and technical skills. So unlike something like Moodle, which takes a little bit of time to get used to in designing and customizing your course, Edmodo can be done in a very short space of time with very basic computer skills. Edmodo is also great for teachers who are working at institutions without subscriptions to things like Google Classroom. Maybe they don't have subscriptions to things like Microsoft Teams. So for teachers working at institutions with older LMSs and with the option of choosing your own method or your own platform, Edmodo is a really good choice. And in particular, Edmodo is great for teachers who are teaching asynchronous classes. It's not specifically designed for teachers to teach live classes. It can be done in a hybrid approach, but essentially Edmodo is best for teachers teaching asynchronously, in which learners are taking the class in an on-demand style. So hopefully the target audience of this workshop is a little bit clearer now. And the next step is to explain what Edmodo is. Edmodo essentially is a website. It's also supported by free apps for iOS and Android. And the Edmodo website is, as they describe, a communication and collaboration platform with LMS capabilities. Essentially, it's a very simple LMS that functions on a website. The Edmodo interface is something similar to a very basic version of a Facebook page. So each class, you'll have a class page and a wall on which to post class announcements, class resources, quizzes, assignments, and etc. And you can see an example here of one of my class pages, a language in society elective, and a sample class post. So for each class, the teacher will post the details of the class and maybe post any attachments related to that particular class. Now, this workshop was described as how to build a free online course. And you may have had experience with signing up for different platforms that you think are free and then ask you later to pay for additional extras. Is Edmodo really free? Yes, the free version has all you need for an asynchronous course. However, recently, I think perhaps to cash in on the current boom of online teaching, there is a paid version called Edmodo Enterprise, which includes Zoom support. But I think essentially Edmodo is best designed for asynchronous courses, and the free version has all that you need. So now that we understand who Edmodo is for and have a rough idea of what Edmodo is, I'll go through some of the steps with getting started to register to Edmodo and creating a class. As I said, Edmodo is a website, so your first step is to go to the Edmodo homepage, which looks like this, and simply register for a free account. Registering for an account is quite simple. You can use your current Google login details or your Microsoft details or Apple, or if you want, you can register via an email address and password. This is a quick and easy process. When you register, you'll be prompted to create a simple teacher profile. If you want to, you can add your picture to help your students realize that there's a human behind all of the class activity, and also provide a brief introduction, which all of your students will be able to read. You also have the option of adding your institution, and you can then link up with other teachers at your institution if you like, but this is not one of the essential features for building a course. After creating your account, your next step obviously will be to create a class. And this is also a very simple process. You simply enter the class name, provide a brief description. So here I've got my class name, Language in Society. My description, I've included just the days of the week and the period that it's registered for the university calendar. And also you can add details of the class type. So is it higher education? What kind of topic? And you can select from the drop-down menus. A lot of these drop-down menus you'll see are targeted at K to 12 groups. So originally Edmodo was designed for K to 12 teaching, but you can use it easily for universities, for high schools. You can use it easily for second languages. One important feature when getting started with Edmodo is to set your preferred language. This can be set by each user. So in my case, I have my language settings to English. So you can see in the top picture, all of the menus appear in English, the dates appear in English. But my students can set the language to Japanese. So they'll see the menus in Japanese, they'll see the dates in Japanese. Of course, my content that I post will be in the language I choose, but the students will see everything else in their preferred language. They just need to select the language from the drop-down menu. Another step when getting started creating your class is to go into the advanced settings, and this gives you a little bit more control over what happens in the class, in particular the classroom management section. You can see in the classroom management section there are a couple of options. The first option is default all new members to read only. This is in the case of a course where you just want to be posting as a teacher and you don't want students to be able to post anything to your class page. This is a good way to control for any troublesome students who might post something strange or inappropriate. If you want to completely control that, you can turn on read only. The second option is to hide my posts from parents. As I said, Edmodo is also designed for example, elementary school, junior high school, and in those cases, parents also have the option of signing up to the class to see what's happening. If you're using that function, if you're having parents also join up, you can select to hide your posts from parents. I'm not sure why you would want to, but the option is there. And finally, there's the option to moderate all posts and replies. So in this case, students are able to post to your class page, but you will first be able to choose, is it acceptable or not acceptable? So if you have those kind of concerns, With your class group, you can go into advanced settings and check some of these. I've never used these. I've never had a problem with students posting inappropriate material, but the function is there if you need it. Okay, so hopefully we now have the basics of creating a class. So we have our simple class name, our class description, but at the moment we don't have any class content and we don't have any students. So we're first going to talk about how to register students to your class. Like most platforms, there are several easy options to register your students to Edmodo. In addition, on the Edmodo website, there are simple guides to show teachers the steps to register students using the different methods. I'll quickly cover a few of these methods very briefly. The first option for registering students is to use a class code. The class code is automatically generated, and you'll simply share this code with your students by sending them the code via email, for example. The option of using a class code is easy and fast. Students receive the code, go to Edmodo, type in the code, and they're automatically members of the class. Another benefit of using the code is that it can be locked at any time. For example, if you have a period of 2 weeks for students to register for your class, you can then lock this code after 2 weeks, and students will not be able to enter the class anymore. So the code can be useful for periods where you have a cutoff point for signing up to the class. One of the downsides of the code is that it's open to anyone who has the code. So for example, if your students told their grandmother the code for Edmodo, she could become a student in your class. So you really have no control over who enters the class. Anyone who has the code can become a student in your class. You also don't have any control over how students register. So when students receive the code, most of them will not have an Edmodo account. They'll go to Edmodo, they'll sign up. Some students will use Romaji, some students will use Kanji. So when you use this method, you'll see your class list will appear in a bunch of different ways. So as long as you're comfortable with dealing with that, using the class code is an easy way to go. Another option to register students is to use a class link. On your class page, you'll find a join URL. You can simply copy this URL, send it to your students. They'll click on this link and they will request to join your class. In this case, unlike the class code, the teacher approves students' requests to join the class. So this gives you a bit more control over who joins. The students will click the link, they'll be prompted with your class and they'll say, yes, I want to join the class. When the teacher logs in, you'll see a list of students who would like to join your class. One by one, you can approve them. This helps to make sure you have the right students in your class. The one downside of this approach is compared to class code, it just takes a bit more time to approve these requests one by one. And the same downside, when students register for Edmodo, you have no control over how they register their names. So you will have maybe a mix of Romaji and Kanji if you're teaching in Japan. Moving on to manual registration. This is exactly what it sounds like. Teachers will manually input students' names and email addresses one by one. You can see a sample screen here. Email is not required, but it's strongly recommended. If you're registering students' email addresses, this will mean that they receive notifications of activity in the class, such as new quizzes or assignments. Of course, the benefit of manual registration is it's more accurate and secure. You're not sharing links, you're not sharing class codes. You have total control over who are members of the class. It also produces an individual student handout with the login details. So once you type in the name and the email address, Edmodo will generate a PDF which gives that specific student step-by-step instructions on how to join the class or how to enter the class. This includes the student's Edmodo ID and the student's Edmodo password. This is also handy for the teacher because it means you have a copy of student login details if necessary. This is a quite common case where students have joined different platforms and they have different usernames and passwords depending on which course they're taking. They'll often tell you, oh, I'm sorry, I've forgotten my password, I've forgotten my username. In this case, you'll actually have a copy of that yourself, so you can help them and remind them how to log in. The big downside of this approach is that it's much more time consuming. It actually has to be done one by one. For some reason, there's no way to import an Excel file or a CSV file to automatically upload students' names and email addresses. So this is one of the really frustrating parts of registering students manually. If you're really focused on accuracy of registration, please use this, but otherwise probably the class code or the link is a faster and easier approach. Okay, so hopefully now we have our class created, a basic class page created, and we also have some students registered to our course. At the moment, our course is empty. We don't have any class materials up there, so we're going to move on to describe how to share course materials. This is an example page of one of my elective classes, and you can see at the top there is my class name, the teacher name below, and the type of class. I've added a class image, but this is definitely not an essential step. If you don't add an image, this will just appear as a blank background. What we're going to focus on is sharing course materials in this section. And at the very top of your page, there is a prompt for you to start a discussion, share class materials, etc. This is the place where you'll be adding all of your class materials each time you make a post to your class page. So when I click on that box, I'm prompted with the following screen, and you can see there is a space for me to type my post for my class. And it's a very simple, straightforward text box. There's nothing fancy here when you're creating a post on your class page. Of course, just simple text boxes are probably not enough for all of the classes that we teach. So there are a variety of options when you create a post in addition to text. The first option is to attach files or images to posts. This is a very easy way to share handouts or PowerPoints, for example. The second option is to add a file to your posts from the library. Edmodo itself has a library to store your files. Personally, I haven't found this very useful, and I'd much prefer to use files that I store either on my hard drive or on my Google Drive or on OneDrive. So if you do want to use the function add from library, you can link your Google Drive or OneDrive. But personally, I think just sharing a file is more than enough. Creating an additional storage library on Edmodo will probably be a bigger headache than it is a benefit to you, I think. So perhaps we have attached a handout for our class, and we want to include some text to describe the class and describe the handout to our students. We'll type that text into the Type Your Post Here section. Now, when we type our post, the formatting of the text is very simple. There's no option to change font size. There's no option to bold, italic, or underline. And this is probably something that we want to be able to do to draw attention to different parts of our message to our students. In order to do this, we have to click the Format Text with Markdown icon. Personally, I think this is one of the big weaknesses of Edmodo. There's no easy text formatting options. Instead, you'll see a list of formatting prompts. These prompts allow you to turn text bold, italic, strike through, or to change font sizes. For example, if we wanted to make something bold, we would have to type 2 little asterisks, type our text, and then type 2 asterisks again. This is a little bit of an annoying point of the posts, but once you get used to it, it doesn't take all that long. So we may have attached our file, we've included our text, and the last step, or an option for us in the last step, is to schedule our post. We can either post the content immediately, as soon as we've finished typing, or we can click the Schedule Your Post button, and this allows you to choose when the post is released to students. So I always use this as a way of releasing the content to students exactly at the scheduled day and period in which they have the class. So here's an example of a post from one of my classes. And you can see at the top that this was released at October 12, 9 a.m. So I've scheduled that post to be released at that time because that's the day and period the students have the class. I've got my class description. Now this content is totally up to you, but I've just followed a pattern. I find it easy for students if you use the same pattern every time you post about a class. And I've included a handout for my students. So as you can see, this is kind of a top-down approach to teaching the class. Basically, the teacher will release the class description, the teacher will release any class handouts, and then the students can work on those handouts themselves. So this is maybe one of the main reasons that I recommend this for an asynchronous class. And perhaps also a content-based class. It's designed for teachers to be sharing materials and for students to work independently on those. There are some options for interaction that we'll talk about a bit later, but I would strongly recommend Edmodo for asynchronous content-based classes. All right, so far we've talked about how to share materials with your students. We're now going to move on to talk about how to create and grade quizzes and also later assignments for your students. So how do we assess students in an Edmodo course? On your class page in Edmodo, you'll see a big blue button which says Create. And from the drop-down menu, there are the options of assignment or quiz. I'm going to talk a bit about how to create a quiz first. When we click on Create Quiz, a very simple pop-up menu emerges with the quiz title and instructions, also the due date and a time limit. At the bottom of the quiz details, there are 3 checkboxes with the option to randomize questions, add to gradebook, so all of the students' results will be automatically added to their gradebook, and also the option of showing students their results after they finish the quiz. When creating your quiz, there are a variety of possible quiz types or question types, which you can see there listed, and you simply select the type of quiz questions that you would like to use. Just like something like Moodle, you can actually save your quizzes or save your quiz items into your library and reuse them for other classes or subsequent semesters. Once you have created all of your quiz items, you'll be prompted again just with a reminder of the due date. You have the option of locking the quiz after the due date so that students will not be able to submit after the due date. If you don't check this option, students can still submit, but you'll clearly see that their submission is late. The one more thing that you can adjust on this screen is schedule for later. So just like a class post, you can choose the day and time this quiz is released. Once you click on Assign to assign the quiz to your class or classes, the quiz will appear as a post on the class page. So you will see this post on the class page, and your students will see the same post on the class page. As a teacher, you'll also see the number of submissions. Students won't see this information. When you make this quiz, students will also be notified by email. So in addition to appearing on the class page, they'll receive an email message to the email address they registered, and this will let them know that a quiz has been added to their class. By default, these notifications are turned on. Students themselves can change notifications and turn them off if they're really bothered by them, but I think it's useful to have reminders for students when new materials are posted. Now, if you create a quiz, such as a multiple choice quiz, a true-false quiz, a matching quiz, where you define the answers in advance, all the quizzes are graded automatically, and these results are automatically added to the gradebook. So after creating the quiz, essentially there's nothing that the teacher needs to do. The grading happens automatically, and transferring the scores to the gradebook happens automatically. You can of course check students' individual submissions to see which items that they got wrong or which items they did well in. And you can also view a summary report, which will show you the average score and also the distribution of scores. You can see in my example quiz that perhaps my quiz might be a little bit too easy, that a lot of students scored quite highly. So it's not a normal distribution, but you can look at the score distribution for each of your quizzes. Hopefully now the steps for creating a quiz on Edmodo are clear. We'll now go through some of the steps involved in creating and grading assignments on Edmodo. So again, on our class page, we go to the blue Create button, and from the drop-down menu, simply select Assignment. Just like with quizzes, we'll be prompted to input a title and instructions, and you can see my example assignment is a midterm report and presentation and some brief instructions. In my case, I have included the instructions, the detailed instructions, as an attachment, but you can include the detailed instructions in your post if you want to. Now, curiously, you'll see that they have formatting options here in the instructions box, but they don't have these same formatting options in the class page posts box. So hopefully in future editions of Edmodo, the same text options, the same formatting options would be available on the class page. That would make life a bit easier. Again, as with quizzes, we can assign the assignment to one or more classes with a due date, the option of locking the assignment at the due date, and adding the assignment to the gradebook. We can also schedule this assignment to be released to students later, just as with quizzes. And like quizzes, when we assign our assignment, it will appear as a post on the class page, and students will again be notified by email. You can see also there is a due date listed. On your class page, there is a calendar. You'll also be able to see all of the due dates highlighted on your calendar. Now, when we click on the assignment as teachers, it will take us to a grading overview page. On the grading overview page, the assignment is listed, the due date, the number of students who have submitted the assignment, turned in, number of students who have not turned in, number of students you have graded, and the total number of students. You'll also see a message about the number of students who have not viewed the assignment. So you can actually check whether or not students have even looked at the assignment. For those who haven't, or even for those who haven't submitted, you can send them a reminder by clicking the Send a Reminder button. You also have the option of requesting resubmission. If students have misunderstood the task or is there something wrong with their submission, you can type in some feedback and click Request Resubmission. I've hidden the student list here from you just for privacy reasons, but you can do this one by one on the students who have submitted or who haven't submitted, all the students in your class. Very importantly, you can also view, grade, and give feedback on the submissions within Edmodo. You don't need to open a separate program. You don't need to open Microsoft Word. You don't need to open Microsoft PowerPoint if these are the formats that students are submitting in. You can do this within Edmodo. So here is an example of a midterm presentation that one of my students has submitted. And you can see that PowerPoint opens within the Edmodo window. So I don't need to download the file and separately open PowerPoint. It opens within the Edmodo window. On the right-hand side is our grading panel. And we can see that I have a space for a grade and a total. So for example, my student may score 23 out of a total of 25, and also a space for me to type a comment and save the grade. When we're grading students one by one, all of the grades that we enter will be automatically entered into a class gradebook. You don't need to create this gradebook yourself. It is created automatically based on the quizzes and assignments that you create. So every quiz and every assignment that you create will be automatically added to this gradebook. The grades will be listed. If for whatever reason you need to manually override the grades in the gradebook, you can simply click on one of the students' scores and type in your correction. You can also export grades as an Excel file if you need to. Finally, if there is a section of your course that is not a quiz or assignment, if there's something else that students are graded on, you can click Add Grade, and this will allow you to manually add a grading category. So up until now, everything that you have seen has been very top-down from the teacher. So the teacher creates a class post, the students read it, the teacher creates a quiz, the students complete it, the teacher creates an assignment, the students complete it. You may be wondering if there's any way to encourage interaction in Edmodo. And the answer is yes, but it's limited. One way for teachers to encourage interaction and engagement in the class is to create topic-related class polls. So when you create a post, one of the options is to create a poll, and you can simply type in a question with a list of options and students select their response. You can see my example is something related to the class 6 content about language variation. And I've just asked students to respond to a simple question about language variation and vocabulary. The responses to these polls are anonymous, but students will be able to see the results in the same way that you can see the results. It's just an interesting way for students to see how their classmates feel about a topic, and also for you to get a sense of how students feel about a topic. The content is entirely up to you. Another way to encourage interaction in Edmodo is to include a task in your class post. So for my classes, I always include a discussion task in every class post, something related to the class handout. I'll ask students to respond after reading the class handout, think about the discussion task prompt, and enter their response in the comments below. So just like something like Facebook with a post, you can make a comment on a post. Students will make a comment on the teacher's post as a way of responding to this discussion task. This is something that students seem to enjoy. Students respond to my posts, and then other students will click like. So in the same way that on Facebook, something like this, you can click like on different posts. Students are able to like each other's posts. Students are able to reply to each other's posts. And it's a bit of a way to engage students in interaction in this class. It's also a useful way to take attendance. So if you want to use, for example, a weekly discussion task topic and ask students to reply to that topic, this is one way for you to take attendance if you're wondering how you could take attendance in an asynchronous class. A final method of direct interaction between the teacher and the student is individual messages. Edmodo has its own messaging built in to the website, and you can send a message to any of your students via messages. You can also add attachments to these messages if students need them. Now, I've used Edmodo before in a regular semester with a class that I'm teaching on campus as a tool to encourage post-class discussion or as a way to assign homework or share class handouts. But spring 2020 was the first time for me to use Edmodo solely as an online teaching platform. And I was curious as to how my students felt about this asynchronous method of learning. So I asked them a couple of questions towards the end of semester, basically their impressions of the class, and if they wanted to change anything at all, what would they change? So I just want to share with you a few of their comments. Just to point out that my course was an elective course, and my students were located all around the world. I had about half of my students in Japan, I had some in China, I had some in Saudi Arabia, a few in Korea, and maybe one or two other countries. So that was the context of my class. Students in different time zones, students who are motivated, students have chosen this course, it's an elective. The feedback that I received from students was a mix, was largely positive. The positives included students pointing out that they felt that the website, Edmodo, was easy to use. Most students, I asked, used the Edmodo website. Some students also used the app on their phones, and students didn't describe a great deal of difference between the experience of the website or the app. So that's a nice point as well, that students can use the app without losing any of the functionality. One of my students said that this was a nice way to study because of time differences. So particularly when you have students in different time zones, maybe doing live teaching via Zoom is impractical. So this kind of asynchronous method is one that works quite well. And another student pointed out the flexibility. So the ability to log in, download the handouts, do the course readings at their own pace, allowed them to study more flexibly. Unsurprisingly, students pointed out some of the negatives of using this kind of platform. Students mentioned they would like to see their teacher and classmates' faces, and that sometimes doing all of the readings that I assigned them alone was a little bit tough. So more chances for students to interact directly with the teacher and interact with each other was maybe one of the requests from some of my students. So this brings us to the summary of what I think are the benefits and limitations of using this platform. And it kind of harks back to what I mentioned earlier as to who this platform is for. So to start with the benefits, I think the biggest benefit of Edmodo is that it's easy. It's easy to set up, both in terms of the time it takes and the tech skills required. So if you've got a course that you've been assigned, even at the last minute, you need to put something together really quickly, Edmodo is a great platform to do that. Also, if you don't have confidence, for example, using something like Moodle to build your own course, Edmodo is a really simple platform for anyone with basic computer skills. The quizzes and assignments are relatively simple to create and grade, and the fact that the gradebook is created there for you makes grading at the end of the semester, summarizing all of the scores, a lot simpler. I think it's particularly suited to content-based classes where the teacher is sharing worksheets, sharing handouts, quizzes, and assignments. I think Edmodo works really well for a content-based course. And as my students pointed out, it's flexible. So the students can take the course at their own pace and in their own time. They don't need to be logged in at exactly the class time and period as mentioned on the university calendar. They can download the materials after you've post them to the class. So that students have some independence and flexibility with the way that they study. As you will have guessed, there are also several limitations to Edmodo. The first being that there is no free video conferencing included. So as my students pointed out, some students will miss the connection between the teacher and student and between students. Because of this, it's very difficult to conduct highly interactive classes. So although there are some methods for students to reply to each other on the class page or to reply to the teacher, I wouldn't use this platform for a class that you are hoping to be highly interactive. So for example, an English communication class, Edmodo is not the platform for you. Also, unlike a platform like Moodle, Edmodo is not customizable. There's not really many things that you can change. This makes the setup really easy, but it also means that you're stuck with the basic format that Edmodo gives to you. And the last limitation, I think, is that because it looks something like a Facebook page, you can find that there'll be a lot of scrolling to find previous content. So your newest class post will be at the top of your page. And if you want to look back at a previous class, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, you've got to do a lot of scrolling to get there. So I would suggest a hybrid approach for people teaching a content-based course. You can use Edmodo for all of your handouts, all of your quizzes, all of your assignments, but with some optional video conferencing. So maybe holding a short Zoom meeting. It could even be once every couple of weeks just to check in with students, to have some discussions about the class content. This might be a useful way to satisfy some of the complaints that my students had in spring. And just to conclude, Edmodo themselves have created a whole bank of online resources to help teachers, which are really, really helpful. These are in a couple of different places. The most useful location is the Edmodo Help Center, and the website is listed here. This is a really comprehensive set of detailed instructions on how to do everything in Edmodo. It's really, really clear. There are short videos. There are really clear steps. So everything you need is in the Edmodo Help Center. If you want to take a training course, there's also an option of taking an Edmodo training course. Well, this will allow you to really get a deeper understanding of how Edmodo works and all of the detailed functions. I don't think either of those things are very necessary. When I first used Edmodo, I probably looked at the Help Center once or twice, but everything else was pretty intuitive. If you're really stuck, there's also Edmodo customer support, and you can contact them directly. I've never had to use this, but the option is there if you need it. So that brings us to the end of today's workshop on creating a simple and free asynchronous course using Edmodo. And I know that this platform definitely won't be for everyone, but for people who are teaching asynchronous courses, particularly content-based, who have limited time and limited tech skills, I think Edmodo is a great option.